Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for attending this session to learn more about how St. Luke's is leveraging Rubrik to secure their M365 data estate. My name is 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀😏. I serve as our field CTO for our SaaS business for North America. And I'm joined by Paul de Vries, who is with St. Luke's, serving as their associate cloud engineer, to spend some time with me to learn more about how they're leveraging their 365 investment and ultimately what led them to choose Rubrik as the provider of their data protection. Paul, thank you so much for spending some time with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So to kind of start things off, would just to love to know and understand a little bit more about St. Luke's University Health Network and kind of your role within the business and just St. Luke's in general, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, we are a pretty large health organization here, mainly in Pennsylvania, uh, Eastern Pennsylvania. We've been a health organization for about 100, a little over 150 years, so we've been around a long time. We have about 20,000 employees, a little over. Uh, we have 16 campus locations, and there's over 350 outpatient facilities that are spread across eastern Pennsylvania and western New Jersey.
Wow. Wow. So pretty significant. I myself am from lived a lot in eastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey, so definitely familiar with St. Luke's as well. So that's great. Thank you so much for that information. Can you then maybe tell me a little bit more about your investment in Microsoft 365 or St. Luke's investment in Microsoft and your partnership in general?
Sure. So St. Luke's is heavily involved with Microsoft. We leverage a lot of their technologies. Um, we're heavily involved in their Azure environment. One of our biggest successes is that we were able to migrate our Epic environment, which is the electronic health record system for the hospital, into Azure. And the beauty of that is that it's so resilient that we're able to have a backup within the Azure environment. So we have a primary and a secondary that we can fail over if we ever need to. And we do that twice a year as a disaster recovery exercise. But then we also leverage the Microsoft 365 products. Right before the pandemic hit, we started with rolling out Teams for the collaboration communication within the entire network. And that turned out to be a real blessing because that's how we all maintained contact in the beginning of COVID. And we still do today. I mean, a lot of remote workers depend on Teams to do their work, to collaborate with their teams. Um, but then what we've also done, we've started to leverage a lot of their online tools like SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, OneDrive, and of course Teams. Uh, so we have a pretty big presence within the Microsoft framework.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it. The organizations that are in your space in healthcare and other heavily regulated industries have moved pretty significantly to the 365 platform for a number of the reasons that you talked about, right? Remote work, obviously driving that, as well as the power of the 365 platform and delivering a lot of the collaboration capabilities that are really required now from the work from home initiatives and others. So, as you are getting into or as you've gone down the journey, it sounds like there was a lot of reliance, or there is a lot of reliance on the 365 platform, and that there seemed to be a requirement, or that the requirements were driving the business to look at some data protection capabilities specifically around backup. Can you maybe talk to me a little bit about what led you all to build a set of required capabilities and looking to understand what's in the marketplace from a 365 data protection perspective?
Sure. So because we moved a lot of our on-premise file servers into SharePoint document libraries, so it's all SharePoint Online. we needed a way to protect that, right? We can't really back up. I mean, we're relying on Microsoft to maintain their data, our data. But we came to a point where we decided, what happens if that data ever gets corrupted? Can we recover from that? And the biggest driver was we've used OneDrive and SharePoint together. Our users were really accustomed to the traditional file server and the file shares where they have a map drive letter. And so in their Windows desktop, they just click on a drive letter to get their files, whether it's a common file or our common share, or if it's a departmental share. We've taken the initiative to move all that up into SharePoint Online. And doing so kind of changed the way the users had to access the data. They weren't used to going into a browser and trying to retrieve files from SharePoint Online document library. So what we did was everyone got a OneDrive account, and so they sync not only their personal files, but they're able to then sync into a common library or a departmental share that they have access to. And so it treats it just like it's a Windows File Explorer, but you're actually using Teams in the background in Exchange. So the problem came about as we got down this path is that the users were accidentally deleting files that they had synced on their OneDrive, thinking they were just deleting them on their local computer. But it turned, they were actually deleting for all the users because they were deleting out of their SharePoint document library. And then they would send calls to the help desk and to our team in general to help with restoring files. And pulling the files out of a SharePoint recycle bin was very painful because there's no good way to search within the SharePoint recycle bin. And in some cases, we would spend hours. No, I'm not kidding. We would spend hours scrolling through screen and screen to try to refine the file. And that's when we decided there has to be a better way. Somebody has to have a utility or an application that would assist us in recovering those files. And lo and behold, we found out that Rubrik has exactly that tool with their M365. Yeah.
Awesome. No, that's it's great information, Paul. I'm sure a lot of the folks that are on this will probably draw the same kind of conclusions as they may have some of those challenges themselves. As you thought about your requirements for a technology and you're kind of building those out, had the organization or had you kind of gone through and thought about what the impact would be from a ransomware perspective if the deletion had taken place from a threat actor or those kinds of things? And, had you maybe vetted out some of the requirements or thought about how your organization would potentially respond to a ransomware attack, given kind of the challenges that you had back then as it relates to recovering files in SharePoint?
Well, I mean, considering the data that's in SharePoint Online is essentially what we had on our file servers on premises. So the data is the same, it's just the locations change. And so the importance of that data is still the same, right? And this could be anywhere from data that our users are using to do their jobs. It's not necessarily patient information, but it's business information, it's processes, it's anything that they need to do their job that supports the business and ultimately our patients. So the data is important, and it's also important that we know it's intact and that it's got integrity to it. So if something were to be deleted or become encrypted, we have a way to recover it. So the data is the same whether it's in the cloud or if it's on premise, but the importance is the same.
Yeah, sometimes we forget the cloud is someone else's computer, right? So still the same challenges exist. So it sounds like you had we've gotten to a point where 365 mission critical for St. Luke's, operationally from a collaboration perspective, and we recognized it as a business that there was a need. Talk to me about some of the things that you had outlined from a requirements perspective for a solution to be able to address this, right? We talked about some of the granular level things and some of the pain that you were experiencing, but, what have you gone through in terms of establishing requirements that ultimately led you to reach out and determine, what would be the ideal partner for St. Luke's to solve this problem?
Well, it was kind of simple for us because we were an existing Rubrik customer for, I think, over 3 years at this point. We leveraged them for backing up our Epic databases, and now we leverage them for our on-premise data. But as we moved into 365, we realized there has to be, a tool, not only a tool, but an application that would support the fact that our data is important. Okay, we have to maintain its integrity, and with the fact that we've used Rubrik in the past, we realized it's basically a single pane of glass to manage the data, whether it's M365 data, whether it's Hyper-V or vCenter. The users, and I'm talking about our department, we would be going into a single browser to manage all that data. So that was important for us. We didn't want to have all these different tools. We didn't want to have so many different vendors involved. We wanted to stick with one vendor.
Yeah. That's definitely not uncommon, where you have multiple assets that you need to protect, and having a single vendor and a single capability there is definitely important, because you want to have a single source of truth, to your point. So, when you had ultimately decided on, looking at the vendors that are out there and evaluating technology, what ultimately led you to choose Rubrik as the partner to help solve this challenge for St. Luke's?
Well, in about 3 years ago, we were looking at replacing our current backup solution that we have or had. And at the time, we had to also replace the hardware, not only renew the licensing and updating the software, but we also had to purchase additional storage to accommodate that. And the systems we were using in the past did not have the ability to recover an entire virtual machine. We could restore individual files and folders, and that was about the extent of it. So we wanted something that we could leverage, not only the fact that we can restore an entire virtual machine, but restore it to another location at it very quickly. But we also wanted the data to be immutable. So we knew that once that backup took place and the snapshot was put into the vault or into the archival location, that nothing can touch it. It won't get corrupted. So we wanted that security aspect of it.
Got it. And that's great to hear. Rubrik is doing so much in this space as it relates to 365 and data protection, specifically for healthcare customers. In fact, Rubrik was just awarded Microsoft's Partner of the Year for Health and Life Sciences, which we're super proud of. And a lot of that comes from our ability to deliver this type of capability where we're protecting the critical data across 365, whether it's OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange, Teams, and really securing that from an immutability perspective, from an encryption perspective, and enabling things like role-based access controls and retention lock to ensure that the right people are doing the right things inside of the application, and giving the organization confidence that not only can they back up all of that data, but do so in a timely manner, in orchestrated fashion that helps prioritize specific data and orchestrates recovery mechanisms that are super critical to day-to-day, the maintenance of day-to-day operations as it relates to data resiliency strategies. So definitely in line there, and really excited about the partnership, Paul, and how we've been able to work and collaborate here. The last question I would have is, as you look towards and forward around your partnership with Rubrik and the investments that have already been made, how do you really see our partnership expanding and ultimately progressing as it relates to not only your 365 investment, but other areas of content that exists within St. Luke's?
Well, we've kind of gone down that path. We started small, I would say, by just protecting one type of workload with our Epic databases. And then we moved towards the on-premises database or on-premises data. And then, of course, we moved into the M365. So we are progressing within Rubrik, as they come out with new products. I'm eager to see what's next for Rubrik because I can only see the product getting enhanced for security reasons and for availability reasons. And I think there is room for enhancement within the product. So I think I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, really excited about the partnership and what we've been able to deliver here, Paul. I really appreciate the time and the information that you've shared here with myself and our customers and our prospective customers. Anything else that you'd like to add before we close this out?
Yeah, I think there is another thing. One of the primary drivers within our organization, we have a CISO who's very involved on making sure that our data is safe, our network is safe, everything is maintained. And one of his strategies is to ensure that if there is a case where we have to recover from either a ransomware attack or just a system malfunction, that we can do so. And he's assembled a pretty good team. They're our disaster recovery team, and they are responsible for going through annual drills for every application that we have. And so we've been able to identify each application and assign it a tiering. And depending on the tiering, that depends on the criticality of the application. So your recovery time operations and your the time that we have to recover everything, we know we can put that into a playbook. So we go through every week, we do a different application, and we actually recover entire servers into an isolated environment. So we simulate a DR recovery, but we don't really put it into production. We put it into an isolated environment. And what that allows us to do is to, first of all, test out the backups, that the backups are actually restorable and you're intact. And then we can bring up that virtual machine, log into it, and ensure that the application is running. So the DR team takes all that exercise information that we create, and they basically create a playbook. And so if we ever have an application that needs to be recovered due to whatever reason, we're not scrambling around doing what do we do next, right? We have a playbook, we have an order to things. So so with the DR team, that's important to make sure our backups are consistent and working.
It's great information. When you think about best practices and how you would, work with from an IT to a security team to a legal team, or working all together in conjunction with one another to make sure that not only do we have the right backup technologies in place, but we have the right systematic approach and the right plan in place if unfortunately the inevitable were to take place, whether that's a ransomware attack or an inadvertent deletion of information. So that's great information. Thank you. So Paul, I've taken enough of your time. I greatly appreciate this session and the insight that you've provided myself and our attendees. I myself am super excited about the continued partnership that we are going to have with St. Luke's and the additional opportunities that we're going to be able to explore together. So thank you so much. Greatly appreciate the time. And for those that are on, hopefully we can talk about similar ways in which we can help you, just like we have St. Luke's. So thank you so much for attending. Enjoy the rest of your day and take care.
Thank you, Eddie.